Uh, so after our last session on communication and pitching to donors, now we are taking it to the next level where we talk about how to write effective proposals. So as part of today's session, we'll be covering the following. Urmi, if you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah. So the first 10 minutes just setting the context. I'll introduce the team who will be facilitating the session today and the housekeeping rules. The next 80 minutes will be completely the content part. The team here will be taking you through the content, introducing you to the different parts of putting together a proposal. We'll also be having a dedicated FAQ session. We'll also try and see how we can distribute the FAQ over the entire content session so you get to engage more with the team and ask more questions. So today, to kind of drive the session on proposal writing, we have representatives from our CSR team. So Satwa CSR team on an average, and I'm sure the team can correct me if I'm wrong, evaluate more than 500 proposals annually. So I thought they would be the best people to come here and talk about what CSRs expect out of a proposal and how to really put together and articulate a strong proposal that can be taken to a CSR. So just introducing the team, we have with us Saloni, who's a senior engagement manager within the CSR advisory team of Satwa. She manages a lot of our work, CSR work in the Western region. So she has over 12 years of experience working in diverse fields of strategy consulting, capacity building, and event management. And her focus overall has been in the development sector, working with different social businesses, understanding their challenges, and providing them coaching and support. So welcome Saloni, and thank you for agreeing to support us with the session. And supporting her today would be Urmi. Urmi is again a senior consultant with our CSR advisory team and quite hands-on in terms of proposal evaluation. So she's, I would say, one of the go-to people within the team to make sure that we understand how to put together a good proposal. So she has been working in the social impact ecosystem for the past 6 years across different functions, implementation strategy and program management. And over the past 3 years, she has worked with over 15 plus corporations and formulating and helping them in their strategy design. And we also have Sarthak with us, who is part of CSR advisory team again and work closely with Saloni and Urmi in towards onboarding NGOs, doing due diligence, and identifying the right NGOs for the CSR team. His interest also lies in program design and development and strategy across different thematic areas of skilling, livelihood, healthcare, education, and environment. So, welcome to the team and really looking forward to an amazing session. So, before I pass it on to Saloni, just few housekeeping rules. So as usual, while the team kind of takes you through the content, would request you to put any questions you have on the chat. We will consolidate that and take it up towards the end of the session or wherever we have space for FAQ. Second, please unmute yourselves, raise your hand or put your questions on the chat or just raise your hand so that we can enable the unmute option for you and then you can kind of voice the question that you have. Also we have enabled video, so if you have the internet bandwidth, would request you to switch on the video so that we can also just see your faces. That would be great. I think that's it from my end. Saloni, over to you to take up the session.
Thanks a ton, Minu, and welcome everyone on behalf of the CSR advisory team at Satwa. Really is an honor for us to hold this session. Today, me and my team are sort of going to be, representing the other side of the table in maybe coming across and telling you all what actually corporates, expect from proposals. I think proposal is just one part of it, right? But the effective aim is how are we writing or how are we enabling win-win partnerships with the corporates such that we're able to get what we want across to them, they're able to see the value. So I think for me, fundraising, proposal writing is very, very sort of valuable, document, input, or a value that all of us should have. And today, me, Urmi, and Sarthak we'll try our best to tell you about our experience on which proposals and how proposals have won, and give you very, very practical guidelines on what you can do to make your proposals more win-win. Would also request at the start, if any of you have any expectations, maybe you could put it in the chat window, and what we'll try and do is through the session, we'll try and, maximum meet most of your expectations. If there's anything that we need to get back to you all on, one of us would get back. So with this, would like to start the session. Across CSR advisory, right? Today, Sattva is one of the largest consulting organizations in India today, which is managing multiple corporate CSR portfolios. And we do end-to-end management, of which one of our largest roles is in selecting the right implementation partner. And today, data also shows that CSR implementation, about more than 50% of the corporates are dependent on implementation agencies such as all of you to actually enable impact on their CSR investments. Therefore, implementation agencies are key partners or key stakeholders that corporates want. The only thing that comes between them is the right matchmaking, which can be enabled by a right proposal, right budget. And today we are here to actually talk to you about what is that right proposal, what is that right budget. Maybe I'll start off with, just first things first. What are the elements, right, of a win-win proposal? And in our opinion, there are about 5 elements. The first element is really identifying the problem statement. Most of us immediately start off with, what are we going to do? But it's important to understand that while we are on the ground, the corporates see the ground, see the problem through our lens. And today the boards and everybody, the senior leadership at corporates are so involved in even finalizing what is getting part of their CSR portfolio. And the first part of it is the why. And often we feel that win-win proposals, if they have that why linked, which is the problem statement, which is very, very data backed, that really sort of makes or breaks a proposal. For example, if you are intervening, let's say, in a block in Shahpur in Maharashtra, what is the data that you have to really state what is the problem? And of course, not so much in details, but even very, very, in a crisp format, if we can state what is the exact problem with data. That's the first thing. The second thing, after we've defined the problem, is important is we define what is the outcome or the objective we're trying to solve for the problem. And again, even before we come to the details, the summary of it holds a lot of value. So to continue, what was the problem with data that we've defined? And the second part of it is, what is our outcome or objective that we need to solve for that problem? What is the objective that we're trying to enable through this program, through this project, that we can do to solve for the problem? That objective almost gives a return, almost enables the corporate to see, okay, what is my ROI that I will get, right? In non-monetary or non-quantifiable numbers, to tell them that, okay, this is the objective, this is the return on my investment, this is the impact that I will see at the end of the time period. The third aspect is, okay, once I've defined the problem, once I've defined my objective, what is my plan to achieve it? Right? The plan could be the operational plan, the offerings, everything. And of course, we'll come to the detailed breakup of the same. But what is my plan to achieve that? So problem statement, objective, and then the plan. The fourth aspect of a win-win proposal is what is in it for the corporate. Often we, only present our side of the story, but it's also important to say what is in it for the corporate, and which is why your initial conversation with the corporate or funder is very important. We've often seen that many corporates are evaluating the proposal because there is an employee volunteering opportunity there, right? So, or many corporates are evaluating it because of maybe the NGO's connection to the government. Maybe it could be the problem. So, that long-term view, the proposal should really state that what is in it for the corporate if they were to look at this particular program or project. And the last point in a win-win proposal is why your NGO, why your organization. And I am only talking about the summary, right? This is the summary. Of course, we'll come to the details, but why you? Okay, today we know there are so many NGOs, so many organizations. There's no dearth of organizations. Even a water problem can be solved by so many organizations. An education problem can be solved by so many organizations. So it's very important to state to the corporate that, okay, if I am the organization who's submitting it, why should it come to me? What are your core elements that make you a win-win partner for that corporate? So very quickly repeating, the 5 elements of a win-win proposal are really the problem statement with data-backed inputs on why the problem, such that it's very, very objective. Secondly, if we were to solve for this problem, what is the objective or the outcome that we can hope to achieve? The third one would be, what is the plan to achieve that? The fourth one would be, what is in it for the corporate if they were to select this program or proposal? And the last point is, why you as an organization? So if these points are literally your summary, which gives the essence of a win-win proposal. And if these sort of attract the corporate, then they go into the meat of the proposal, which will come now. But these elements are very, very important. One quick question I'm sort of going to answer. Thanks, Naomi. You've said that is operational plan and strategy the same? No. So Naomi, all the elements I just said, right, that is your strategy to win a proposal. Strategy is always at a 50,000 feet high level, right? Where you're literally talking about just the essence of why you should be doing this and what is in it for you. The operational plan will literally cover, once you've convinced the corporate or the reader of the problem statement and the objective, then the operational plan will literally cover what are your activities to achieve that objective and to solve for the problem. So they're very, very different. The elements I just told you about is the key strategy that you can start off with for your pitch. I'll sort of move to, and we at Sattva have been evaluating multiple proposals. So we now have we've created templates that, according to us, at least form the baseline for an implementing organization to give us information that we know will work for the corporate. And of course, you can add to this basis, your context, the program's context, the organization's context. The first element definitely, and the elements that I spoke about is really the summary, right? When you move into the template, then comes your project design. So how have you designed the project? Again, the problem statement, the objective, what is the sector, which is the geography, segment, timeline. And while these sections are good, make sure the data is very crisp and make sure you have enough data to back it up. Today, just to give you an example, we were there at a corporate and we were for the same geography, we had 5 different proposals. The proposal that was finally selected was the one which had data, secondary data. So and today you all would agree there's enough secondary data that we can all just use and populate. But that data makes it very, very objective and makes it a win-win. So anything that we're saying, please use a lot of data in populating the proposal. So the first section really comes to design. The second section is the execution approach. So like I was saying, the planning. What are your major milestones and activities? And again, starting off with milestones, because it's always good to tell them that it's not about the impact that you will achieve at the end of the project timeline, but it's also about the mid milestones that you will achieve that we can all show visibility for. So therefore, the milestones are very, very important. And of course, linked to activities, almost like an LFA. So what we're saying is LFA, sometimes all of us think that it should be created after we win a proposal, but at least a bare minimum LFA is also one of the key elements that can be created, which defines what is the objective or the impact, and linked to that, what are my outcomes, my activities, etc. What's my execution approach? What's my on-ground implementation plan? And risks and mitigation plan? Very, very important. The third section of it would be the budget. Again, we'll take you all through a detailed budget sheet, but the budget sheet also should be complete in its sense, where you are literally giving the cost structure of the program. We'll talk to you all about what are the different cost structures that we at Sattva sort of recommend, and of course your payment schedules also, just so that in one particular document you've really highlighted what it would mean for the corporates when they sort of enter into this kind of an arrangement. What is your management plan, which includes what is your monitoring approach and what are your monitoring indicators? Again, very, very important, because while you are implementing it, the corporate also expects that there is governance and monitoring by you. And how are you taking care of the risks? How are you taking care of the challenges? How are you at a field level ensuring that the quality is being maintained? So what is your monitoring approach? Who are the people you're putting on to monitor the program? What are your governance cadences, etc.? What is the team who you're going to set up, and what is their experience? So sometimes stating the cumulative experience of the team matters a lot. And lastly, organization profile, of course, and which is where in the summary you're just stating very crisp format why the organization, but here you're justifying. So which includes, of course, organization's background, philosophy, capabilities, key CSR donors, very, very important. Any published reports, most of us are now, we have impact assessment reports that have been undertaken for our various projects, which so many times are even, openly available for the public. So can you put those, which make a lot of difference? And of course, videos, even maybe testimonials. One thing I want to highlight, which is very important in this section, is organization processes. For example, there is a WASH project, right? We often get questions on how is the organization very elaborate in terms of the process. For example, do you follow a 3-vendor process, right? Do you follow, what are your processes to undertake that your utilization or your cost management is very, very effective? So these are some of the processes that need to be necessarily, coming out in a proposal, which gives more and more confidence to the corporate that this is the right organization that I'm partnering with. Remember, the corporate still thinks from a business lens. So we as implementation partners have to not just bring the social lens, but also the business lens when we are writing a proposal, which is essentially and don't even look at it as a proposal, but essentially what is the value that you're going to be giving to the corporate? That has to be looked at. For me, if we could move ahead. Very quickly, what are the best practices? And after this, my colleague will take you all through a RFP template also. We want to make it very, very practical for you all. So we'll take you all through a template. But very quickly, before we move to the template, what are some of the best practices? One is, like I was saying, using relevant data points to build your rationale. There's enough amount of data. In fact, at Sattva, we have a platform called India Data Insights. You can absolutely subscribe to it, which provides readily available government data already converted into charts that can be used, and very, very credible data to build your rationale on the problem statement. Keeping very, very logical timelines and milestones and activities. Multiple corporates today are now trying to equate their grant cycle to the financial year. So can we make sure that we keep very, very logical timelines, 12 months, at a start, such that the corporate is also assured that, okay, at least whatever are the doable activities, I'm finishing it within the year. Of course, the other activities, not saying every activity has to be restricted to a 12-month period, but at least most of the activities. Providing project relevant and quantifiable outcomes and output and indicators. So very important to give them measurable outputs and outcomes. And again, implementation partners are best to do this because again, that defines really a win-win proposal. At times, we see so many proposals where the outcome are very, subjective statements or qualitative statements. That doesn't go well. A simple ask from corporates is, please keep your outcomes very, very measurable. And that's on us. How do we design the project? How do we design the program such that we're able to give that? Explicitly state the rationale behind calculation of planned outcome figures. Again, so the assumptions need to be very, very clear. Well-articulated monitoring plan and the governance structure. And of course, any case stories, success stories that you have, please feel free to highlight them. That could be a separate document, but it just states the conviction and confidence, right, in terms of us providing this value-added proposal to the corporate. So I'd now like to hand it over to my colleagues Urmi and Sarthak to take all of us through a detailed RFP template. We'll then open it up for question and answers before we move to the budget section, but please keep the questions going. Over to you, Urvi and Sarthak.
Thank you, Saloni, and good afternoon, everyone. Just give us a couple of minutes till we put up the template on our screen.
Just quickly answering some questions while my colleagues are putting up the template. Yes, the presentation and the templates will be shared with everyone. Please keep your questions and any expectations going so we could answer them on the go.
So while my colleague Sarthak is just pulling up the RFP template, we want everyone to know that while we think this is one of the ways to present your proposal, this is not the only way. This is something, as Saloni mentioned earlier on, that has worked for us and the partners that we work with. So just want to start by that message. There are 5 to 6 sections to this proposal. And what we will do is we will go through each one of them. Some of them will be very self-explanatory. So we will just kind of have a cursory view of those. And then some may require some discussion, some deliberation. So we will spend some more time on those aspects, right? We begin with a quick introduction of the project and also the organization. So you can see you start with the project title, you start with your organization's name and the date and the place by which you submit the proposal. Then the foremost thing comes, which is the compliance checklist. As we're all aware, compliance is one of the core drivers for CSR activities even today. Of course, the other one being impact. So please make sure that you fill this section with a lot of care and attention and give all the details which are relevant to your particular organization, right? Beginning with the legal entity that it is, registration number, date of registration, and then going into each of the documents that are required to be sent as attachments. So have them ready, have them scanned in a manner that they are legible. 12A ATG, the CSR registration form, if there's any memorandum of association, trust deed, depending on the type of organization that you come from, list of directors, trustees, board resolutions, PAN card, cancel check copy. So all of these, please go through them in detail and make sure that you do not skip any aspect that is relevant to your organization. We often see that there's a lot of back and forth in the first step itself when proposals are being submitted, because the corporate is not going to go ahead without having looked at these compliance documents. Then we'll move on to the applicant information. This is to ensure that whatever communication needs to happen for the purpose of this proposal happens with the correct SPOC, right? So you fill in the details, and this should preferably be someone who has drafted the proposal and who knows the proposal through and through, can answer questions about the proposal, right? So this is the applicant information bit. We can go ahead. Yeah. Now, before we go into the detailed aspects of what Saloni mentioned, there is an executive summary that the proposal, starts with. The proposal content starts with. This is also because more often than not, all of these proposals get tabled to very senior members of the corporate, and they may not have enough time to go through the detailed proposal. So they want like a quick glance regarding what it is that you are proposing. So being extremely articulate, specific is very helpful in this section. First, we begin with project objective. So as Saloni mentioned, after you have articulated your problem statement and also the sub part of the problem statement that you aspire to solve with your project, that will then lead you to the objective, and that is what you will put here. Usually what also happens is that a lot of proposals we get which have many objectives, 7 objectives, 10 objectives, and a lot of those may not be even achievable in the duration of the project that is proposed. So it is important to be realistic about these objectives, because it is this objective that the corporate will keep in mind and go ahead with. That is then followed by the focus sector that your project falls under. Geography, the target segment. Here also be a little bit specific and descriptive. For instance, if you're looking at a particular type of children, right, whether it's children belonging to, let's say, street situations, then you need to mention that here. Generic information regarding the targets segment will not be as helpful as probably a little more detail would be. And then the project duration. This includes all the phases of the project. While you may be proposing funding for the first phase, but you need to call out all the phases. Then we come down to the budget. And here you talk about the budget of the project and the budget that you are seeking funding for. Going to hand over to Sarthak. Sarthak, if you could take us through this section with an example as well, so it's cemented for all of us.
Sure, me. So hello, everyone. So to start the example for the budget section specifically, since this is a budget summary, we will look at inserting the total budget for the program proposed. For example, let's assume that the total budget proposed by the implementing organization here is 80 lakh rupees. How much of that 80 lakh rupees is going to be a part contribution by the client? In some cases, it might be the entire contribution by a single client altogether, a single funder, in which in terms we will have 80 lakhs as the fund amount mentioned here. In some cases, certain projects are co-funded by multiple corporates. In that case, whatever amount of the total percentage of 80 lakhs are we expecting from a particular client, say client A, we will mention here, and whatever the remaining amount is being co-funded by the other funder, we'll mention in the total contribution from other sources in the column C. While the total expected direct beneficiaries will be the exact amount of beneficiaries that we're looking to target. For example, in terms of skilling, skilling and livelihood-based program, where we're looking to have a skill development training of youth in Jaipur for youth between ages of 18 to 29. Let's say we are aiming to train at least 100 youth over the course of next 3 months. So 100 as the total expected number of direct beneficiaries will come in this block. Also, if at all the project being proposed by the implementing organization is a multi-year project, then we expect the implementing organization to give a multi-year breakup, year-wise year, on year 1, year 2, and subsequently as and when it comes. Urmi, over to you for the expected outcomes.
Sure. So going back to what Saloni had mentioned in the overview section, right? You need to mention the exact outcomes which are measurable that you are chasing through this project. a quick difference between outcomes and output, and we will go into the details of this when we look at the LFA, is that outcome usually is measured in delta change, right? What is the increase or what is the decrease that you aim to bring about through this project? For instance, you could look at an increase in student learning outcomes for an education project. You could look at a decrease in the air pollution index for an environmental project. So outcomes are always either in an increase or a decrease or some form of change being measured over a period of time. Then we have a sustainability plan. Very important as we move in this journey from one-time contributions to actually creating impact, solving problems, as opposed to only looking at a project for the purpose of that project. It's important that we look at sustainability. So whether it is community ownership that you are going to bring in as a part of your sustainability plan, whether you are going to look at some amount of contribution from the government in the future in terms of a government partnership, whether your project will at some point become self-sustaining by generating some amount of revenue, which will again go back to the project implementation itself. Whatever it may be, you need to articulate that here so that the idea that you are solving a problem and not just implementing a project is further cemented. It's further clarified, right? And then building credibility with your experience in similar projects in the past. It could be with a different beneficiary set. It could be in a different geography. It could even be a slight variation of the current project that you're proposing. But beyond these three, it wouldn't make a lot of sense for you to have details of other projects which your organization implements. And then a brief NGO profile. We go into the details of the NGO as well in the annexure part of this RFP, but this is more for a quick overview. So you highlight the year that it was founded in, the primary sectors that the organization works in, the expertise that it brings in, key donors, and also beneficiary profiles. Sarthak, let's also have a round of one more examples for this, for all the sections, yeah, from expected outcomes, yeah.
Sure, Urmi. So in terms of having examples for expected outcomes, as Urmi correctly mentioned, that the outcome in this manner is the delta percentage change that eventually happens to the intervention that the implementing organization along with the corporate does on ground. For example, let's assume that we're doing an intervention in environmental area as a key thematic area. We're trying to target farm fires and kind of buying the farm residues from the farmers and using them to produce some other alternatives, thus cutting down farm fires happening in the Rajpura area of Punjab, for example. Thus, the expected outcomes in this manner will be the amount of air pollution or the air toxics, if it is measurable in a manner, prevented. At the same time, how many kilograms of agri residue was procured and thus diverted from being burning. Such delta outcomes are being expected by the implementing organizations to be mentioned here. And these outcomes should be more on a delta level, on a total level at the end of the program that we're trying to achieve through these interventions on ground. Again, coming to the sustainability plan, this will form a very key aspect of the proposal, especially in terms of an executive summary manner, because from an overview perspective, a client will be able to quickly see in the long run, in a 5-year roadmap, for example, how do we exactly see our exit from the program? Are we trying to build up a community ownership through a community-run skill development center in case of a skilling program? Are we looking at a payback model from the students in case of a skill development model, where we expect students to give some kind of payback as they eventually get into placements? Or some kind of institutional setup where maybe the government takes up the ownership or the panchayat takes up the ownership of the entire skill development center set up in that particular rural area of the village. Lastly, experience, re-emphasizing the importance of this part. This is very important to enhance the credibility of the organization who's applying for funds to the donor. Any experience into similar fields, similar past projects, different geographies are acceptable, different beneficiary setups are acceptable. This kind of proves your point that given the fact an XYZ organization has previously worked as an implementing partner on such a problem, they have credible experience in actually solving the problem on ground, and they know the nitty-gritties of how to interact with different beneficial groups and how to eventually tackle the problem from more from mission mode. And last but not the least, the brief NGO, as we mentioned previously, will be very important by describing in brief what was the founding year, different sectors, different kind of works, expertise, other donors, and other beneficiaries that NGO overall is targeting. In short, this entire executive summary will provide a very holistic overview to the client at one go itself. Because as correctly mentioned, nowadays proposals are being tabled to very senior leadership people, and they don't have time to go in detail. But this entire summary has been framed or has been templatized in a manner that can provide a strong point of view about what the organization is eventually stand for and what the organization is going to do on ground for the funds being given to them. Urmi, I feel we should move forward to the main proposal, and we can discuss the table of contents.
Sure. So since Saloni has already gone through the table of contents, let's just come to the project design section. Yeah. So once again, we begin with the project objectives. What is it that you are trying to achieve, right? That needs to be validated by the rationale and the problem statement articulation, along with some findings of a study that you have done to ensure or to build the case for this particular intervention, right? So, Sarthak, would you like to take an example here? Yeah.
Sure. So just as an example of validating the project objectives that we're trying to achieve. For example, one of the key project objectives in a skilling or a livelihood program can be to achieve livelihood enhancement and have placement of industry relevant placement opportunities for the youth being trained under the skilling program. Now, to justify this particular objective of the program, we expect the implementing organization to come up with some kind of secondary data, if at all. If the implementing organization as an implementing partner, you're proposing an intervention based out of Jhagadia in Gujarat, we expect you to come up with data that maybe this particular percentage of youth in Jhagadia is still unskilled, or they're facing unemployment issues. Whatever relevant data points we could support our project objective statement with will be very important. While of course these data points can be either secondary in nature from existing literature sources, government data, government reports, or if at all, as an implementing partner in past, you have done any kind of baseline studies on your previous assessments also. So I feel this is a very important point which validates whatever objectives or outcomes you're trying to achieve. Yeah, Schedule 7 activities. Again, coming to the Schedule 7 activities part, as we know under CSR law, we have certain activities mentioned under Schedule 7. And from a compliance perspective, it is really important for the donor to align that whatever interventions are being proposed are very well aligned with one or more than one of these activities. And having provided a list of all the activities, we expect the implementing partner to kindly mention exactly which all activities out of the given list above is being covered in this part. For example, as mentioned, again taking example one by one, where we have skill development. So skill development primarily falls under the part of promoting education, including special education, employment, enhancing vocational skills. That is the part 2 of Schedule 7. And if at all it's a skill development that is focused specifically for women, then this program also falls under this part 3 of the Schedule 7, which is promoting gender equality, empowering women. So in the same manner, we expect you to outline all the activities out of this list clearly here. Maybe we'll take a small pause for the questions first. If we have any questions, we would be happy to discuss them right here.
Sonal, you had raised your hand, so if you want to share your question. Can you try now, Sonal? Just a second. Yeah, can you try now?
Yeah, thank you, Meenu and Sarthak, for taking this question. So can you please go to the previous page? Yeah, So while talking, so while talking about the rationale or the problem statement with the study findings, what if this is a project in a new area? Like for example, Doorstep School works for the education of children. Now we have been working with the urban poor, but now we want to move in rural areas. But we have not conducted any survey because we don't have the funding, and we are applying or we are giving this proposal to start this project in the rural area. So we won't have necessary findings for that particular area. So how do we mention that data here?
Sure. Thanks for the question, Sonal. So regarding the kind of problem you posed in front of us is that primarily you don't have any primary sources or any primary studies to support the relevant need in the given geography that you're entering. But there should be some kind of secondary literature existing. In terms, there are a number of government sources. For example, a very credible government source we have come across recently is Mission Antodhya. It's a government source which mentions block level, village level data on almost every thematic area possible. So whatever secondary resources we can find on, there are a number of reports. There can be ASAR reports. There are UDICE reports on even rural data.
Right.
So using such sources, whatever case we can build upon, so as to justify that yes, the given geography has an underlying need, has an underlying issue to be dealt with, and thus in this manner you are going to use the prospective funds to achieve the objectives. Like that's from my side. Urmi, Sonali, you want to pitch in?
Yes. Also, Sonal, just adding to Sarthak's point, there will be instances in which at a ward level, you may not get data online, right? You may actually have to not conduct the study, which I understand that there will be budget constraints, but actually go to the ward offices, block offices, sometimes even certain villages if you are working in a rural setting, get those documents and do your own analysis. So you can try to be efficient about it, but you're lucky if you're working at, let's say, a district level, because district level data is very easily available versus a block level. And then when you go down to ward and cluster, it is difficult. We recognize that. But sometimes, at least in my experience, what has worked for me is actually going to the block office, cluster development office, or even the ward and getting data from them. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
So just to add to Urmi, and I think what helps, right, Sonal, why this data? Because Sonal, it, to the corporate, what it conveys is the effort that you've taken to go to that geography to collect the data, and therefore how strong is your understanding of the data? Because as you rightly said, Sonal, of course, every proposal might not be in an area that you've previously worked, but collecting that data only enhances the strength of that proposal, because the message that it's giving to the corporate or the funder that you've already been to the area, you've understood the context, and therefore you have developed the course.
Okay, thank you, Saloni.
Team, there are a couple of questions that came in the chat earlier. Maybe I can quickly kind of take you through that, if that's fine, or would you want to take it later?
We can take some now, right? Saloni, Sarthak, I think it should be fine, and we'll keep then going by the flow. Yeah, sure.
Right. So I think three main questions. So one was around if it's a recently incorporated NGO, right? How do they ensure that, so there was a point around establishing credibility through case studies from the past. So how do they do that if that's a new NGO? That was one question. Second was on the length of the proposal. So how do you ensure all micro details are available, but still the proposal is like a 3 to 5 pages sort. Third, clarity between objectives and outcomes, right? Are objectives same as outcomes? So maybe we can take these three questions and then go on with the content and then come back later again. So the first question was on a new NGO and how do they kind of establish credibility? Yeah.
Got it. So the first thing is that, of course, if this happens to be your pilot project or one of your pilot projects, it is going to be difficult to articulate your experience in the past. In this scenario, what helps is having a detailed profile overview of the leadership and also of the team that is going to be the operational team on the project, right? So where do they come from? What experience do they bring to the table? that is what you can leverage in the event that this is the very first project you're going to implement. Second option is that if this is the very first project you are going to implement in a particular thematic area and you have implemented projects in other thematic areas, then in that case, you may give the example of the other projects in other thematic areas to build credibility, because that will show your operational excellence, right? The fact that you have been able to achieve operational excellence in, let's say, livelihoods, and now you want to move in the field of education. And when you are moving in the field of education, this is the team you're coming with, which brings in this kind of expertise, thereby setting you up for success at this project. Saloni, Sarthak, anything to add?
I think it will be very well captured. So I think definitely not the cumulative experience of the organization, but the cumulative experience of the team and the leadership. If that can be sort of really, shown or demonstrated, I think that will really help. One more thing which will really help is your risk and mitigation plan, So definitely calling out what are, as a new organization, right? What are the possible risks that you will have and your mitigation? So as long as you are convincing the corporate that we recognize we are a new organization, but we have very well planned the offering or the project, and we've also sort of predicted the risks and the mitigations, that will give confidence. Just wanted to add that, Urmi. Thank you.
Sure. Sorry, Meenu, could we get the second question again?
Yeah. So Urmi, the second one was on the length of the proposal, right? How do you ensure that it's a 3 to 5 pager, but still having all the micro details? Yeah.
Got it. So there's two things to this. Your proposal is going to be a lengthy one because of the kind of details that are being requested in today's day and age. Your proposal is going to be lengthy. But at the same time, there's two ways to not make it protracted, right? One is to have that summary filled in a crisp manner so that you have that 2-pager or 3-pager overview in the event then someone only wanted a cursory look at your project. And then, of course, the confidence is that the details will follow. So everything that you put in the summary, if anyone has a question on it, they can actually go through the pages that come in and they'll get clarity on that aspect. Secondly, in those 10-12 pages where you are going through each and every section, articulating it, it is important to be to the point. So for example, in this rationale problem statement, right, while you may be, let's say, working on education and the problem of student learning outcomes, it may not make a lot of sense to quote state level data or even national data when you are going to work in a particular district, right? So you may want to only talk about it from a comparison point of view, but you may not want to start your story by saying, okay, today in India, there are X million children who do not get access to quality education. I mean, that is somewhere already established, right? We don't need to read your proposal to know that data. But what the donor may not know is that, okay, in this particular district of Dang, there are only 60 schools that have access to electricity, right? So just making sure that you choose the right facts and build your narrative around them and not really go all over the place.
One last point to add to Urmi. And that's why if you see the RFP template that Urmi and Sarthak are walking you all through has necessary sections, right? So do not worry about the length of the proposal. So maybe you're taking 8 pages, right? But it has the necessary sections, which gives the liberty to the reader to choose whichever section interests them. So often at times we see that, of course, it's a 5-page proposal, but it's not bucketed into sections, which makes the reading very difficult. So it's important to focus on, like Urmi said, the summary, the crispness or the to the point, sort of value of writing, and also divide it into multiple sections, which this template will give you the opportunity, such that you are also making sure that the finance team from the corporate gets to read the relevant section, the impact team reads the relevant section. So you're also making it sure that you are helping different readers, get the relevant information they need.
I think we had one more question, right, at this point.
Yeah. So that was the difference between objective and outcomes.
Okay. So objective is a little more high level, all right? And objective need not necessarily have the element of delta change. So your objective can be, I want to increase the student learning outcomes of children in grades 3 and 5 across 15 government schools in Uttarakhand. Your outcome then will be that I will increase the learning levels in mathematics by 20%. I will increase the learning levels in language by 35% over a period of 1 year, 2 years, whatever your project is. So objective is a little more high level and need not have the delta change element in it, while the outcome will be the actual change, because your objective may not be achieved through just one outcome, right? There may be 2, 3 outcomes that you may need to have to achieve your overall objective. So outcomes will be a little more detailed and have the element of delta change. Anything to add here, Sarthak, Saloni?
Like just another example would be from an environmental perspective. For example, the project objective says to improve the livelihoods of forests and nature-dependent tribal communities by enhancing availability of food from forests and improving agricultural productivity. While this is the more broader level objective, the outcomes, as we mentioned, will be more delta change perspective. For example, restoration of degraded forests through appropriate conservation activities in 5,000 acres of area, improved availability of food in targeted households during stress periods of March to June, or maybe reducing the farm expenditure and improving the productivity of agriculture from 100 quintal yields to maybe 200 quintal yields. So such exact measurable outcomes which are used to achieve the overall objective will be the outcomes, and the objectives will be more high level. Saloni, anything from your side?
Nothing would mean Satvik, you've covered it.
Sure. Meenu, do we have any other questions?
I think we can proceed now and then
Sarthak,
take the
let's move
questions.
on.
Sure.
So as Sarthak was saying, very clear, you need to map which Schedule 7 activity does your project fall into. And after that, we come to the target segment. More often than not, we receive proposals in which we need to have a lot of back and forth to understand what exactly is your beneficiary selection criteria. Because children, okay, marginalized communities, okay, but that's a little too vague, right? What exactly do you mean when you say marginalized communities? Which definition are you following, right? That is what we need to articulate here in target segment. So it could be, it needs to be a little bit more of a demographic profile of the beneficiaries that you are targeting. It could range from the age, the gender, the socioeconomic background. It could even be certain geographies, right? While your target geography is a separate section, you may also include that in your target beneficiaries, because you only want to target people living in this particular, let's say, for instance, slum, or living by this particular plant or factory, right? So that is a target segment. And then target geography, yeah, exact village. Even if the village is big, you want to be as specific as a hamlet. You're only targeting 2 hamlets out of the 7 hamlets in a village. That needs to be mentioned. That same goes for municipalities, right? Wards, municipalities in urban, in the case of an urban geography. And then the timelines, right? So timelines again need to be articulated for each phase of the project. There are going to be many projects that only have one phase or a kind of start and finish. And then there will be projects which will span over a period of time, right? So you need to call out the timelines for each of these phases separately. Sarthak, do you want to take one example very quickly for these 2-3 points?
Sure. So apparently, talking about the target segment, as Urmi mentioned, how important it has become to exactly specify and the kind of selection criteria we are following for the communities that we're selecting. For example, let's assume an implementing partner is doing a program for reproductive health of adolescent girls in the areas of Chakan and Waluj in Aurangabad. We need to be very specific about, okay, these girls are school-going girls. These girls belongs to the age group. If we are at all mentioning adolescents as a target group, what age group are they mentioning from? What kind of family backgrounds does these girls belong to? our target beneficiary, and also the kind of engagement plan we're going to do with them. For example, are we going to look at a sanitary pad distribution, or what kind of plan? Similarly, under target geography, we need to be very much specific about how many blocks are we covering under one particular district, how many villages do, or how many number of households fall under a particular block or a particular village. But these are exact details which help a corporate to identify what kind of interventions are being exactly proposed to the given beneficiary. In terms of timelines, one thing to specify very clearly, this becomes a very important part since nowadays corporates are looking at fund utilization in an yearly manner. They want the funds to be utilized clearly from a compliance perspective by the end of the financial year. So this will give them an opportunity to accordingly plan out the grant rollout or the grant management, and accordingly align with the implementing organizations also on how fast or how slow the program should be implemented in the given phases. Urmi, over to you for the execution approach.
Thanks, Sarthak. Yes. So now we come to kind of the fundamental or the core of your project and your proposal, which is the execution approach of the project. So here we recommend presenting this, your project theory of change, your philosophy, and also the operational plan in an LFA format, right? So there are a few key elements to an LFA that must be present, which we will go through today. And then there's, of course, additional elements which you may choose to add, right? First one is milestone. So in order for you to implement your project, there will be certain milestones that you will have to achieve, right? So you start by that milestone, then you go into the activities, or even these could also be labeled as inputs. To achieve this milestone, what it is that you're going to do, your interventions essentially become your activities and your inputs. Then because of these activities, inputs, interventions, what is the immediate output? Okay. And that output needs to be measurable. And for you to get that output, nothing apart from the input needs to be required. So which means there is no other dependency on that output apart from the input that you give. So that will be your output. And when these outputs are accumulated over a period of time, what is the outcome, which is again the delta change that we've been talking about, that you will achieve for each of these milestones. It is not necessary that, for each milestone you have an outcome. There can be two milestones which together lead to one outcome. Similarly, it's, for achieving one milestone, you may have 2 activities, 10 activities, and 2 activities may come together to give you one output, right? So your activity, for example, I'm going to let Sarthak actually take you through the example. Sarthak, why don't we go through an example for this table?
Sure. For the LFA, which is the logical framework analysis here, as we mentioned, we have different components, milestones, activities, outputs, and the outcomes. Taking through an example, for example, one of the relevant milestone of the project says a milestone has, which is kind of forest farmer capacity building, a farmer capacity building. And then we look at different activities. One of the activities mentioned under this particular milestone is forming farmer groups. So the immediate output of this activity will be, for example, say 50 farmer groups are formed and trained and mobilized on best farming practices. Similarly, this is another activity which says establishing market linkages for the farmer groups. And the output of this particular activity says market access to credit facilities was provided to 50 farmer groups. While these two are separate activities having separate outputs, the outcome of these activities can be cumulative, which is improved household income by 30% through farmers collectives of 2,500 households. And the impact in this manner will be, of course, better living conditions, better standard of living. So in this manner, as Urmi explained, while milestone will have different activities and different activities will have different relevant outputs, the outcomes can be or cannot be cumulative in nature. They can be maybe a quarter cumulative, maybe of all the activities that particular phase, a particular milestone picks up in a particular quarter of the year. A quarter might have a cumulative outcome at the end of the quarter. Or maybe in some cases, we've also observed in certain programs, depending upon different programs, the outcomes might be annual in nature. So on this part, I feel this was what is all about, having a key LFA, which forms a very important part and gives the funder a clear perspective about what the exact activities are going to be and what are we going to achieve through each and every kind of step we're going to do. And eventually all these steps in a summation manner are going to add to a more cumulative impact at the end of the program. Urmi, over to you.
So in summary, apart from the administrative expenses that you have in your project, and the activities also, the administrative activities that you may undertake, all other activities ideally should be a part of this table, because that reinstates or validates the fact that you need this activity to achieve this particular outcome, and you need to achieve this outcome to have the impact that you have envisioned. So keep that in mind. It is not that only 2-3 key activities need to be a part of this. For a skilling project, for instance, if your first milestone is to skill a batch of 20 candidates, right? For that, you may even need to train your staff. They may need to undergo some kind of capability building training. That also needs to be a part of this table, and that needs to come under activities. And then the output will be, X sessions attended by Y trainers at our organization. And the outcome will be that there is an increase in the assessment levels of the trainers, right? So the trainers can get assessed in the beginning and at the end. And that increase in their knowledge regarding that particular subject in which they're imparting training will be your outcome. We can move ahead, Sarthak. Yes, execution approach. So this is a mixture of, it could be a flowchart, it could be a little bit of a timeline also. You have to go into not heavy details, but high level details of how you will go about implementing the program. So what will be the first step, or will be the second step, or stage 1, stage 2 in that phase itself, right? Stage 1, let's say, could be getting the relevant permissions from whether it is the community members, whether it is the government, the panchayat, so on, schools, other institutions. So that could be, your first thing, the prerequisite that you need. Parallelly, you may start training your trainers. So that is something that you need to mention. What will that be then followed by? You will probably, for a skilling project, center-based skilling project, you look at centers that you need to rent. So get that in order. Parallelly, you will be mobilizing candidates. You may have mobilization campaigns across colleges or other community areas. So all the things that you will do, the high level picture of that needs to come in here. If, for example, you follow the model of one trainer trains 20 other trainers. Let's say you follow a TOT model for teacher training. You get 20 teachers to attend special workshops and improve their pedagogy skills. And then each of those teachers actually goes back to their block and trains other 20 teachers, right? So that flow needs to be very clear and explicitly stated here in the implementation plan / execution approach. Risk and mitigation. So here it is, we've all been through the pandemic. We're still in the pandemic era. And because of this, not just the pandemic, but overall, there are so many risks that kind of derail the project, right? Whether it's in terms of timelines, whether it's in terms of resources, whether it's in terms of utilization of funds. So you need to be able to preempt anything and everything that can go wrong with your project, right? The fact that, let's say you wanted to implement it in these 3 villages in Tumkur, and the villagers said, no, we don't want this intervention. What is your plan B? So you need to think through all the possible things that will go wrong and have some kind of a plan in place, because that shows how agile you are as an organization, and especially as a project team, to implement this project no matter what. Right? So it will not be that, because one thing didn't work out, your entire project is in shackles. That should not be the case. You need to preempt if schools shut again. Do you have have you made a plan to pivot to a virtual model? Do you have the necessary infrastructure in place? Are you going to leverage, let's say, the Diksha platform for teacher training? Are you going to now upload your workshop videos there, for instance? So you need to preempt that, and you need to have a plan in place for this. This again increases your credibility in the ecosystem, not only with this particular donor that you're pitching to, but generally in the ecosystem, right? Sarthak, we can go ahead. Yeah, we will take you through the budget Excel in detail in some time. But overall, this is how the summary of the budget needs to be presented, because there will be a few team members who are evaluating your proposal who will only look at the summary, and then there will be the others who will actually look at each and every line item in the budget. So as you can see, there are certain cost heads that we usually bifurcate budgets by, being capital expenditure, operational expenditure, admin cost, and leverage, if there is any, for this particular project, and the total project budget. Sarthak, do you want to quickly take an example?
Sure, Urmi, sure. So while we're kind of trying to set up a budget summary here, and as we mentioned, how important will this budget summary serve, especially when someone needs to have a quick overview. Of course, other than the detailed budget template that we'll walk you through in some time, taking example, for example, you're running a skilling program, and to run a skilling program, you rent a particular center, or you basically buy a particular space where you want to start the particular skilling center. So that buying expenditure skilling center space will come into CapEx. At the same time, operational expenditures, training, the costs for the trainers, the cost for the stationery, the costs for the content development in this case will all fall under OpEx. Administrative cost, the cost including that is internal to your cost, including the project manager, the project M&E person from your side, the HR plus travel, station, other expenses included. At the same time, leverage, if at all we have any technology leverage being used in, for example, what if as an implementing partner for a skilling program, you are leveraging an existing LMS platform, given the fact that we all are kind of still living in kind of a pandemic only, and hybrid models of teaching is the new go-to thing. So maybe we want to offer certain LMS platforms to be used. So that cost can come under leverage. It can be either technology in nature or any other such modular solution. At the same time, another very important aspect of this table will be the percentage of total budget. This kind of gives a very fair idea. And as in the following sections of this workshop, we will kind of run you through the detailed budget template. We'll also emphasize upon how these different cost heads act as, and what are the minimum benchmarks for these percentage of total budgets. So that will be a very important parameter if we're able to mention that. And client's contribution, of course, excluding the leverage, if at all, we will mention it here. And lastly, but not the least, we will also talk about the preferred payment schedule. Since the client might look at a tranche-based payment, and the tranches can be milestone-based tranche-based payment, where maybe for a program based upon skilling implementation, again, the client might say on the graduation of the first batch, at the completion of the first 3 months for a skilling in IT/ITES sector of 100 youth, I will release the second tranche payment, and the first one gets released in signing of the MOU. The third one gets released maybe the end of the second batch in a similar manner. So this also needs to be very well specified to the client in this approach itself. Urmi, do you want to take this up, the project management plan part?
Sure. So coming from the LFA, because you have a very detailed, a very robust LFA now, it is very, very clear what is it that you're going to monitor. You're going to monitor the outputs and you're going to monitor the outcomes. That is what you need to. So in the monitoring approach bit, you need to discuss, articulate how you will go about monitoring these outputs and outcomes, right? So whether you have a separate team, you need to talk a little bit about your entire monitoring framework and the how part of it, how you will actually do the monitoring. So will you have field visits? How or what will be the frequency? So what all you will do, right? And how often will you do it? That will be your monitoring approach, followed by the indicators that you will measure. Sarthak, if you could just go down. Yeah, followed by the key performance and monitoring indicators, which are essentially the outputs and outcomes that you had mentioned in the LFA under planned. So your indicators would be planned versus actual. So if you said you will conduct 20 sessions on soft skills for this particular batch of candidates undergoing the skill development holistic program, then out of those 20, how many sessions have you conducted? That is at the output level. So you need to kind of iterate your output indicators as well as your outcome indicators. And you need to call out the frequency. Outputs are usually measured on a either monthly or quarterly basis, and outcomes are usually measured on a biannual basis or sometimes only annual, right? So that is what you need to articulate here. Sarthak, let's go ahead. Project team. Yeah, this is self-explanatory. You need to list all the members of the project team, from the accountants to the teachers, trainers, everyone that is involved. It's important that you detail that out here. And yes, this is a declaration, which is again self-explanatory. Sarthak, we can go ahead. Yeah, this is the organization profile, right? That is, what we were talking about earlier on. What is your organization and why you? What makes your organization different? Organization processes that you follow. Saloni mentioned whether it is regarding vendors, how do you onboard vendors, whether it is the fact that you have a mid-year review appraisal and your people costs increase in the middle of the year. So whatever is relevant to the purpose of this project and is also what you are requesting funding for, if there are any policies or processes related to those aspects, you need to articulate them here. Because if you are, let's say, if your people cost is, 20 lakhs for the first half of the year, and then it suddenly becomes 25 lakhs, the evaluator needs to know why. Because you have a mid-year raise policy, right? That is why that increase is there. Otherwise, it's not going to add up for them. Organization structure, yes, that is self-explanatory. Financial information, yes, that is also there. Total funding, okay. Projects and donors, that is also self-explanatory. Published reports, videos, even photos, if you have, you can add them here. And that brings us to the end of the Word document, the proposal format for now. Meenu, are there any questions, any more questions on this template itself?
So there are a few questions on the budget part, but I think that's something that you'll be covering now. But maybe we can just check with the participants if they have any questions specific to the RFP template. The budget piece, the team will take you through that now. But beyond that, if you have any questions, please feel free to share that.
Yeah, I have one question.
Yeah.
Sonalia, can you please show the template? So this question is regarding the list of funders or donors, funding partners. Yeah, so like we might have a list of projects and say 20 plus 30 plus CSR and foundations and individual donors. So what is there any cap above which this number is to be included, like if the donations or the CSR funding is above a certain percentage? Because this is always a question as to how many should we mention here. And many a times it is also confidential, mentioning the funder name and the funding amount.
Maybe I can take this. Sonal, so I think the important bit is which are the funders, which are the projects that you would like the corporate to know, right? Okay. So of course, those which are confidential, you don't need to mention, right? But maybe this was a very, very good project that you want the current corporate to know, and there is a link to a report, right? You might want to mention that. Maybe this was one of your top funders, right? And they funded a sizable amount of your program. I think you would want to know. Maybe this was something that you did in partnership with the government. Again, there are very good impact stories. So again, it's not about the numbers, right? Of course, the rows are indicative. There is no good or bad number, but I think it's about which are the projects, which are the corporates, which are the names. For example, if it is a BFSI, banking and financial industry corporate, right? Would you want to give the name of another bank? in that.
Right.
If it is a tech company, would you want to give the name of another tech corporate, right? If it
So
is maybe
essentially highlights.
highlights and the names of the relevant
Yeah,
projects.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
another thing, so for this, do we need to take any approvals from the CSR? Or
That's up to you, Sonal. I think whenever you sign an agreement, I'm sure you also have that confidentiality clause, right? Where you can maybe don't share data of that corporate, but you can
Right.
necessarily share knowledge, right? Information of that project, which is open source. So I think it should be
Okay.
doable,
so,
subject to
and
any
you're
requirements that your legal team.
right. And here, instead of giving the actual budget, we could also give a range.
Indicative budget.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and you can put a clause below that these are indicative numbers. But the essence of this section is to show
Yeah,
that
it's
we want
essentially
to highlight some
highlights
of
and
the
top performance.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
So which is why if you see link to the report, right? So we would also encourage you to maybe share
Yes.
those project names where you have a very good impact assessment report that you can share.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question on the payment schedule being mentioned in the proposal, or should it be part of the MOU?
Both practices are good. We encourage it to be in the proposal because what happens is then, a lot of corporates today are bound by law to ensure utilization of their portfolios in that year or transfer it into an unspent account, right? So if you sort of state that and not at the MOU stage, a lot of corporates also take decisions based on how much of my money, if I put into this project, will be utilized this year, right? So therefore, putting in those schedules, again, is a good practice. You can choose to put it either in this template or in the budget template that we will show you, right? You can choose between the two, but we suggest it is good to do it at the proposal stage. And of course, the final, maybe if there are any discussions on that, maybe not 3 tranches, 2 tranches, you can put it in the MOU, but at least an initial pitch from your end should include what are the tranches.
Just a final question on this section before we move to budget. So I think Ravi has asked, what are the elements of the organization processes?
Maybe Urmi Sarthak, I can quickly take this, but do feel free to add. I think organization processes, Ravi, matters a lot in terms of the nature of the project that you are undertaking. Suppose it's a very infrastructure heavy project, right? How do you do a vendor onboarding? How do you, look at maybe partnerships with the local community? If it is a very heavy resource dependent process, for example, in an education or skilling project, a lot of the project budget is dependent on the team that you're hiring and their costs. So what is your team? What is your process in terms of hiring team members, right? What is your process? So if you cover, Ravi, basic departments, right, in terms of procurement, HR, accounting, leadership governance, I think these should be all. Maybe if there's any other contextual thing, you can add it. MIS, right? What's your process on MIS? I think these are good processes to add.
Yeah.
So I mean, I feel we can move to the budget section now.
Sure.
Yes, Tony, over to you.
Thanks. So I think moving to the budget, right? And again, budget is as important as proposal. At times we've seen so many of the corporates directly move to, how much is it going to cost us? Because this is really implies that, okay, I'm convinced about the impact, but how much is it going to cost us? So budget is as important as a proposal, which is why we wanted to include a budget section also today. Of course, we'll take you all through the template, but what are the best practices to follow while filling out budget templates? One is break it down into line items, right? Imagine giving a picture that it's going to cost you, let's say, 2 crores versus it's going to cost you maybe, 1 lakh into so many items. So given that breakup really helps because it then gives the corporate the right, very objective and very transparent way to decide, oh, why is it costing 2 crores? So then the conversation is not, oh, it's 2 crores, but the conversation is on, yes, there are relevant assumptions and details and breakup items on which the budget has been done. Why also the breakup matters? Because you will be, at times we've seen multiple NGOs just giving us, for example, this activity is just going to cost us this. The question that we ask them is, what are the assumptions you have taken? It's so many times also good to state that to the corporate. For example, if your human resource cost, you putting it as, let's say 20 lakhs versus you putting it as 10-member team, each member team will cost us 2 lakhs, right? So then that sort of shows the strength of your budget to say that we have evaluated it to the T with an assumption that, of course, these might change, but at least you've evaluated it to the T. Also remember, today the corporates need a perfect, utilization evidence. What do I mean by that? They will not just be happy that if you just give them a utilization statement that I had committed 20 lakhs, I have spent 20 or utilized 20 lakhs. No, they will want very auditable, data-backed vouchers, right? Of that split of 20 lakhs that they are able to show it to their CFO. Because remember, as part of the recent amendments, now the CFOs of the corporates have to actually certify that whether the money that was given has been utilized in the right manner. And we all know the length that a CFO will take. They will obviously want very, very auditable vouchers that they can use. Therefore, we would request that you break down the line items while you're creating a budget. It just increases the strength of that budget. Secondly, considering cost drivers to group line items. For example, you can, instead of just putting it as 1, 2, 3, 4, put it into major cost heads like salaries, outreach, and I will tell you all how do you sort of differentiate into the types of costs, but definitely breaking it down into groups. Thirdly, the time period of each line item, right? So I think one of you all had also put in a question. Yes, definitely giving a monthly or a quarterly breakup definitely matters. You can take a call whether it has to be monthly or quarterly. I think a good question to ask your corporate or your funder. A quarterly is considered very, very good. There are some corporates who want it monthly. So maybe a question that you can ask before developing the budget. And lastly, differentiate into direct and indirect costs. Maybe only if we can move to the next slide so I can take them through what is direct, indirect, and admin. Sorry, Sarthak, are you taking care of the slide? Sarthak, we can move to the next slide. Yeah, thanks. So there are 3 types of cost, right, in a budget. The first one are the direct costs. What is a direct cost? Direct costs are those which are directly attributable to a project and they are incurred for the purpose of the project. For example, in an education project, you are hiring community volunteers to take care of certain schools. Now, they are there for the purpose of the project because they're 100% allocated and they are going to be, without them, the purpose of the project will not be met. Those costs come into a direct cost. For example, in an education project, you are opening a community center. Now, obviously, without that, your community center is the base unit of conducting those remedial classes, right? Without that, you are not going to be achieving the purpose of your project. So breaking it down into breaking down the cost and attributing all the costs that lead to the purpose of the project under direct costs. Indirect costs. Indirect costs are those.
Saloni, sorry to interrupt you. So the example that you gave about having a community center and it comes under direct costs. So the rent or the establishment costs will be included in the project cost. Is that what you mean?
Yes. So Sonal, for example, and maybe Sonal, you can, just to be fair to everyone, maybe once we finish the entire thing, we'll open it to question and answers. But
Okay.
I'll quickly answer this.
No, because the example that you gave was so relevant to what we do.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. No, fully appreciate.
Sorry.
So, for example, if you're opening a center, right? Yes, absolutely. The rent of that center, which is the cost of that center, will come under direct cost. But it has to be necessarily for the purpose of the project. Just to give you another example, in an education project, if you are building certain TLMs, teaching and learning materials, they are for the purpose of the project. So they will come under direct cost. To go on to the other side, indirect cost. Indirect costs are those which enhance the process of the project. For example, M&E. If you've hired an M&E person for the project, if you don't hire an M&E person, your purpose of the project is not getting affected, right? The project can still go without the M&E, but it is enhancing the process of the project. It is adding value to the process of the project. For example, a project manager. If you don't hire a project manager, it's okay. The project will continue, but you are hiring a project manager for the purpose, for the process of the project. All those costs, therefore, will be indirect costs. So you will always see that these are costs which are not directly attributable to the project because they are shared costs, right? So therefore, it will be indirect costs. The third will be admin costs. These are, of course, they're incurred at an organizational level. They cannot be broken down. We completely understand. So most of the organizations say that, admin overheads, management overheads at 5%. So therefore, you sort of put it under admin overheads. So again, to sort of say direct is all the costs directly attributable for the purpose of the project. Indirect costs are indirectly attributable. They're not directly attributable. Most of the times they're shared resources or costs, and they are for the process of the project. And the third one is the admin overheads. A good cost breakup usually is that direct costs should be at least 80% or more of your project costs. Indirect costs should be 15% and less, max 15%, and in admin overheads should be maximum 5%. So if I were to give you a good breakup, 80, 15, 5. We could move to the template and then we could open it up for any question and answers.
Sure,
Maybe we just take the question and answers after the quick template.
Yeah, I think we should just quickly go through the template and then leave some time for questions. Yes. So this is the detailed budget template that we want to take you all through. I would like to start by saying that it is definitely a very detailed template. The first time I saw this template, I thought it was exhausting to fill this up. But the kind of impact that this budget template has, especially with increased scrutiny on CSR and documentation around CSR, is unmatchable, right? So you need to put in that effort once, but then you will have, if you do fill up almost everything on this sheet extremely accurately, then there's very little chance of at least your project being rejected because of any issues with your budget and the way you have presented it. A lot of the sections here also are sections that you work on, but more in a rough format or more in a whiteboard format. I can give you a small example. If you are quoting a certain cost for M&E of your project, right? Let's say you say 5 lakhs for M&E. How have you arrived at that 5 lakhs? Usually, a lot of organizations end at giving the part or the percentage of salaries of the M&E team, right? That is something that organizations give and it kind of ends there. But you will also have travel, logistics kind of costs. And while it is understandable that you may not actually go ahead and conduct the exact number of field visits that you plan to, but the fact that you have given, so let's say 3 lakhs out of that 5 lakh is your people cost, M&E, and the other 2 lakhs is logistics. The scrutiny has increased so much that even that 2 lakh needs to be broken down. Although the corporate will not hold you to it, right? They will not say, okay, you had mentioned you will do 2 field visits per month, but now and each field visit will cost you 10,000 rupees, but now your each field visit is costing you 15,000 rupees. That's fine. But the idea here is to have that confidence that you've not just randomly put 2 lakhs. If you've even used your past data because you've been working on the field for so long, there's still some thinking that has gone into proposing the value of 2 lakhs. Sometimes we often get into very heated conversations with NGO partners in which there's so many questions, right, regarding breaking up this 2 lakh. And there's a lot of dissonance in why we need to do that. But this, in our experience so far, is the reason why that needs to be done. So even if it is a rough note that you have made, and then that's how you've arrived at 2 lakhs, you need to mention that in the breakup. Just going through the column heads very quickly. So description of the cost, let's say we have project salaries. Objective will be, how is that kind of connecting to the project objectives, and it'll be very basic. I mean, you may even feel it's a little superfluous, it's redundant, but it's always good to over communicate than to under communicate in a proposal, especially in a budget for a proposal. So the objective will be, the project staff is hired in order to train, let's say, candidates. Then you have frequency of cost, right? So salaries usually are monthly expenses. So you enter that. Unit of measurement will be months. Then the number of beneficiaries covered, right? So that one particular resource at your organization is going to if they're 100% allocated, and if they work 8 hours a day, and in those 8 hours they conduct trainings of 4 batches, then the total number of children candidates in those 4 batches is what is covered by them. And it doesn't mean that those beneficiaries cannot be repeated for trainer 2, because trainer 2 may actually be a counselor, and they may also be impacting the same 20-30 beneficiaries that trainer 1 is, but for a different purpose, right? Rationale for the number of units, monthly. I mean, salaries are annual, so that's fine. You can write that. Then there is unit cost, breakup of unit cost. So in this, you may want to even mention, the usual salary structure that you follow. If it is different for contractual resources, if it is different, let's say you have an element of PF for employees who are on your roll, you don't have that for contractuals. So better to mention that at this stage itself. Then you go to, sorry, Sarthak, where were we? Then total cost, number of units, rationale for units. I think that is more of a quarterly breakup. The idea here is to understand what is the planned utilization for each quarter. And that will once again feed into not only your tranche breakups for the corporate, but also for when the corporate will know whether you are on track with respect to utilization or not, right? So your annual people cost may be, let's say, 20 lakhs, but if 80% of that is only going to be released or rather utilized by you in the month of March, because let's say you only pay your employees once a year, which is very, very less likely. But the idea here is that will be picked up in your budget. So if you have infra costs, for instance, let's say you want to put up solar heaters or solar panels, right, for electricity. If you're going to buy that in the month of March, and if you are going to hold on to funds which will make up, let's say, 30-40% of your project budget, then that will be a risk for the corporate, because in March, maybe your supplier is not around. Maybe you cannot make that purchase in the month of March. So the idea here is to make sure that you have planned utilization in a manner that the corporate can also adhere to CSR compliance. That's about it. Sarthak, if you want to also maybe look at one more example, we can go through one more line item very quickly, and then maybe have the floor open for questions.
Sure, maybe I can take a different cost head. Like under direct cost, we had, of course, cost as mentioned by Saloni previously, which are directly attributable to the project. Under indirect cost, for example, the management staff salary, the project manager at the NGO level will be including cost. Similarly, objectives, we'll have frequency, which will be very much monthly in nature, unit of measurement number of months. Beneficiaries covered, this might or might not be a relevant column to be filled in terms of indirect costs. Then number of units, rational number of units, and accordingly a quarter-wise breakup for the same as well. In the same terms, when we see at the admin costs, similarly under admin costs, there can be a number of heads falling up, which is the audit fees, head office costs, or other stationary miscellaneous costs. One of the key things which I would love to highlight here in this entire template is the per beneficiary cost. While, of course, we're trying to follow up on the cumulative numbers, it is very important to know the per beneficiary cost being provided here, because that allows corporates to benchmark different proposals and at the same time select the one which is the most efficient one, which has the least amount of cost covered with the highest amount of beneficiaries being covered in the given proposal. So do you want to add anything on this point?
Thanks, Sarthak. No, and what Sarthak said, just to add, which is why we've added that, because that's the lens you also have to have, right? For example, your per beneficiary cost for a skilling and livelihood program is coming out to about 6,000, right? You also then can maybe just think about it, that whether it's relevant or can I increase, decrease, so that lens is very important. Also, you all might be just thinking that this is a very, very detailed format, and I know it takes time, right? But the best part is that if you've done this exercise, I think for similar programs, you can always replicate it such that it takes lesser time for you to contextualize it to maybe a new proposal, new corporate, right? One. Secondly, what we also suggest is that, always to align with the corporate on what are their basic contours, such that, when there's a reasonable amount of, interest shown on both ends, your end as well as the corporate end, and there's reasonable amount of alignment, I think we suggest then move to this budget format and work on it. But it's always good to submit it, because budget really makes is the decisive factor. Just to give you all another example, let's say you're doing a WASH project where you are maybe constructing toilets in schools, right? Most of the times we've seen that, let's say NGOs just put like per school, it'll take us, let's say 3 lakhs, right? But what is important to give is the breakup. And like for 3 lakhs will include, let's say 1 commode, 1 hand washing station. I'm just giving indicative numbers, but it's always good because that shows the breakup or the strength of how you've arrived at that 3 lakhs. But happy to take up any questions, now.
Saloni, so maybe I can kind of share some of the questions that have come up, and then we can open it up for the participants. So I think one was on the admin cost. I think you covered that. There was earlier a question on what is leverage. So if you want to kind of explain that, we can start with that.
Sure.
I think this was as part of the proposal, but yeah.
Correct. Thanks, Meenu. I think leverage is a very important thing, right? For example, your entire project budget is about 20 crores. But in that, you are also leveraging part funds from the community. That gives a lot of confidence because A, it's not a charity mode. B, you are also making sure that you are on the path of sustainability because you're building in ownership right from the start. And we're not saying that, you force funds on the community, but more and more we're working with so many of all of you organizations, and we're seeing that, community participation and ownership, a lot of organizations drive from the start. So that's the leverage that we're talking about. Leverage can also be from community, from government, from maybe another funder, etc. But this is to show that while the project is costing so much, we're only asking the corporate to take so much, and the leverage is either from the community, from the government, from other corporates. I know it's easier said than done, but whatever extent you can show. For example, we recently evaluated a WASH project. The organization very nicely said that, while 90% of the costs are being borne by the corporate, 10% of the costs are being taken through by communities, taking a per household sort of, fee from them. Even in a skilling project today, most of the corporates are always interested in, can we take even a small amount, right, as a registration fee from the beneficiaries? Because then what happens is the ownership comes from the start. So this is what we meant by leverage.
Thanks, Saloni. I think there was a question from Ravi on the indirect cost, and a question around, is indirect cost hence a function of scale?
Maybe Ravi, do you want to unmute yourself and elaborate on the question?
Sorry, you want me to explain it again, the question?
Yes, please. Yes, please, Ravi.
No, so I was just sharing because you also said a preferable threshold limit of 15% for an indirect cost. I was just sharing that will be a function of scale. So for example, a project manager who can look after 200 beneficiaries, for a corporate who is funding only 50 beneficiaries, that person will come under an indirect cost. If it's a project large enough to cover 200 beneficiaries, then that manager would become a direct cost.
So Ravi, that's where the difference between direct and indirect cost comes, right? I'll give you that example. Now, Ravi, if you are keeping only a part-time manager, right, which means that the presence of a project manager is not affecting the purpose of the project, then of course, directly it comes into the indirect costs. But Ravi, if the project is very critical and if the project manager's role is very critical, right? Such that without the project manager, the project's purpose will not be met. Then of course the project manager's cost will come under direct cost. So it's about how you give the rationale for it.
Okay, and it's not as much about the that the entire beneficiaries or the entire cost is being funded by one donor. That's not the benchmark to classify it under a direct cost.
No, because so that's the second benchmark, right? Whether that cost is directly attributable. Is it 100% allocated or is it not? But if it is for the purpose of the project, Ravi, then obviously you need that as a 100% cost, right? But if it's not for the purpose of the project, you can make do with just maybe part of that resource, then of course it's an indirect cost.
Ravi, hope that clarifies your point. I'll just move to the next question.
Yes.
Thank you. So, Sonal, you had a couple of questions around beneficiary overlap and per unit economics. Do you want to kind of share that?
Yeah, so while talking about mentioning the number of beneficiaries in the budget sheet, like beneficiaries covered, I think Urvi mentioned like one trainer covers 20 and then they cover further. It could be for teaching and it could be for counseling. So that means if we are offering different services, beneficiaries can be same.
Yes, that the beneficiaries would remain the same in that.
So the overlap doesn't matter here is my.
Yeah, the idea is that whatever cost that you are putting down for this project should have some impact on the beneficiary. However, that needs to be for direct costs. For indirect costs, it may not actually be attributable to the beneficiary set itself, right? For instance, accounting. I mean, I don't think that can be correlated with a particular beneficiary set, right? That's an organization process that you have.
Right.
Yes.
And so I had just one more after that. So yeah, coming to objectives. So objectives for management, staff and salary. Can we say that M&E of a project? So can it be as an objective for the management staff? Okay, great. And another thing was.
Saloni, anything to add there?
No, I think Gurmeet, but
Yeah.
sort of just in a gist, I think, yeah, it's good to mention what is the objective of that person, right? Whether he is a manager, whether she is a supervisor, what is their objective in the project? What is their role?
Okay, so designation, yeah, role.
No. Designation is there, but what is the role of that particular person in that project, right? What is the objective of that line item?
Okay, so like the person would be monitoring the project.
Correct.
Yeah,
Correct.
okay.
Because if you don't have a role, then there is no
obviously
reason for you putting it.
Yes. And I think this is the last from me. So about the direct and indirect costs. So when we say that we have shared resources, though that would naturally come under indirect costs. Can we generalize it like that?
Maybe Urmi Sarthak, I can take it up, but please feel free to add. So it's not good to generalize it, right?
Okay.
There are two aspects in which you see the difference between a direct and indirect cost. If it is for the purpose of process, and if it is a shared or a dedicated cost, right? The costs have very different connotations. So I would request you to look at it for each cost item, right? And see firstly whether it's for the purpose or the process of the project, right? And then see whether it's a dedicated or a shared. If you've answered, most likely if you answer the first question, the first indicator, the second indicator is very self-explanatory, but I would urge you to go cost by cost. For example, Sonal, an M&E cost, maybe you're hiring a dedicated person because of their salary and because of the quantum of the project, but you can still, M&E is not required for the purpose of the project, it's a process. So even if it being a dedicated resource, it will come under indirect cost. I hope you're getting my point. So therefore, Sonal, the deal breaker is the purpose of the process.
Yeah, but for example, like we have a 120-day program where at the end of that 120-day program, a child is able to read fluently. So monitoring plays a very important role here, right? And or for that matter, I think in any program, monitoring would play an important role. So how can we say that the monitoring staff does not align with the purpose of the project?
So now that's for you to justify, right?
Okay, okay. So it
Without
is
the
how
monitoring,
we, okay, how
correct.
we give the rationale and
That's why
how
I'm
we,
saying purpose and process, very contextual to each cost, right?
okay,
If purpose is that without that cost, you can't meet the purpose of the project, right? But
okay.
process is that that cost will help you enhance the process of a project. That's the difference.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Great. If there are any other questions, I would request participants to kind of unmute yourself and ask the question. I think we have kind of loaded all the questions that have come on the chat so far. If I've missed out on any, please speak up. Request all of you to speak up. Amita, I hope you had certain questions on the chat. I hope that's resolved. I can see Urmi is responding to it.
Meenu, I feel Ravi has raised a hand.
Sorry?
Ravi has raised his hand.
Please, Ravi.
Sure. Just a small question. When there is a section on the organization capabilities, and then organization capabilities could also be a very broad question to articulate. So I also just wanted to understand the expectations and the type of articulation that is preferred.
Do you want to take this up?
Sorry, Saloni. Just been looking at the chat. I
Sure,
want
sure.
the question to be repeated.
Urmi, what Ravi's question is, what are the indicators of mentioning organization capability in the last section of the RFP?
Organization capabilities in terms of what all the organization has been able to do or achieve
What
so
can you
far.
give? Yeah.
Okay, so you could talk about the knowledge part that you have built so far. So you can talk about whether you have any publications, any reports. You could also talk about any awards, any achievements that you have received for the work that you have done, because that again is a reflection, representation of the capabilities of your organization. And I think those two broadly should be it. Anything else to add, Saloni, Sarthak, please feel free.
I think, Ravi, the list can go on, right? Like Urmi mentioned, but it is about what
Right.
you want the corporate to know is very essential about your organization, right? It could even be the cumulative experience of the team. It could even be government convergence that you've got, because many corporates today are looking at working definitely with the government. That's something that it's been difficult to crack, right? So I think you have to take a call, Ravi, based on the context of the corporate, that what are some of your achievements or your capabilities that will matter to the corporate.
And then it will be very similar to the response of why you. So organization capability and
Yes.
why you could
Yes.
then converge.
Yes.
Right?
So why you
And
comes
then
in the
generally,
summary section, but the organization capability in the detailed RFP, then you can elaborate on.
sure. And what is the corporate going to get out of it could then be linked to the corporate priorities, and that could be related to their CSR policy, brand statement, return on investment, and the type of segment that they wanted to create their presence in,
Even
and the
EVP
geographical
sometimes,
niche.
Ravi. Even EVP
Sorry?
sometimes, Ravi. Even EVP sometimes, Ravi.
EV
Many corporates also select certain
EVP is
programs because it gives them employee volunteering opportunities, right? So
employee.
therefore, there could be multiple threads. So even more important for us to understand that why is the corporate taking up this project, so that what is in it for the corporate can come out very clearly.
But it would be a combination of employee engagement, geographical niche, target segment, beneficiary segment, and the uniqueness of the model, right? Sure. So these 4 to 5 elements would then culminate into what is important.
Great. Any last questions? Otherwise, we'll wrap it up. So just want to see if there are any other questions. Yes, we will share the recording and templates with you. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I think we can wrap this session up. First of all, thank you so much, Saloni, Urmi, and Sarthak, for again anchoring this. Really, really great session. I think the detail, the level of detail you guys went into, I think, really appreciate it. And I'm sure the participants also found it very useful. What we will also do is share with you all a feedback link. Please share your feedback. That will just help us to improve our sessions going forward. So thank you so much. So we'll catch up with you for our next session, and you'll soon see information emails on our next upcoming session. And thank you so much again, the team here, to agreeing to support and facilitating this great session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.